Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
Your co-host Rich Gear here as usual. All right, Doug, what's the subject we got today to talk about?
Well, it's all these fossils that the evolutionists are debunking themselves. We just don't have to do any work here. It's like as if we are starting to get some of these characters on our side, unwittingly maybe. But I think that this is, we got these headlines here. Missing link primate fossil debunked. Bye-bye birdie, the famed fossil loose avian perch. There's a bunch of different things that are going on in the evolutionary world, and then this Ardipithecus thing we talked about
last week or a week before, a couple of weeks ago, or whatever. Yeah.
This is something that debunked the famous fossil Lucy, and so I guess
that's like 3 in a row, Doug.
Right.
So usually 3 strikes you're out. At least that's baseball. But in evolutionary concepts, they keep coming back. Doug, what do you do with the thought? I mean, they will say, "Well, see, we're honest about our science." I said, "Well, but to some extent, you may be. Although there's a lot of other issues, but let's say these ones are pretty much true. Still, I think a point you and I have talked about and we just brought up before we started shooting here tonight was, how do we trust the new evidence? The old evidence was sold to us as though that was the be-all and end-all. Lucy was like the proof, the Archaeopteryx was the proof. These missing links are the proof. Every time they come up with one, and the popular media runs with it, it's like they're almost like, I don't call them shills for the evolutionary lobby, but they just believe everything they say, and they run with all these things. And some of these, Doug, have been for years. Lucy's was around for years and years and years. Of course, you and I were really born after the Piltdown Man thing, but that was 40 years. And yet what's really amazing, Doug, the people that come up with these things, even though they do eventually come clean, I think the real scientists do, the popularizers never really, that was last week, let's forget about that. But then the new one, they say, why should I believe you? Why should I believe it?
Nobody talks about the Martian meteorite anymore.
Yeah, the Martian meteorite. What a crock that turned out to be, And you're right. I mean, and you say, well, you're just bringing up old stuff. I says, we have to, because you want to push it under the rug and make us convinced on new stuff that to me is just as suspect, and probably in 5 or 10 years, could be 40, like Piltdown Man, are going to turn out to be bogus like everything else you have come up with to try to prove evolutionary missing links through the fossil record. If all turn out to be bogus, and they turn out to be misnomered, misapplied, and basically a lot of energy has been misspent trying to prove this through these fossils.
Well, when I see something like this, I sort of have it in the back of my mind that somebody's grant money ran out.
That's the other thing that really makes me suspicious. I've mentioned this several times. I've talked to people. I remember there's one special incident I had with a young lady who was really getting mad at the creationists because her girlfriend got convinced to be a creationist through our works and said, all your propaganda. And I finally turned it around on her and I said, excuse me, we do have a lot of people who are convinced and are very passionate, and we have prolific writers. But everything we do is financed by ourselves, pretty much, okay? It's self-sufficient. It doesn't have the grant money, which is dealing with origins research, is all evolutionary. I told her this. I said, all your popular magazines, which get money from these things, are all evolutionary. Your TV shows, your school systems, it's all
stacked. For ours, okay.
Except, what's that?
Except for our TV show.
Well, yeah, but ours is done. We do it on our own. We don't get these big salaries and all these things are going on. We're not asking for that. My point is, this young lady, the propaganda machine is hugely enforced for the evolutionary lobby, not the creationary one. That the creationists have as much of a hold that they do speaks 2 things. Number one, we either have the truth and people are able to see it, okay? That no matter how much you stack the deck, there's enough people that are going to see how much the emperor has no clothes. These 3 things, articles you're talking about, Doug, are case in point of those kinds of things. Right. It's really kind of amazing.
Let's start out with Archaeopteryx. So bye-bye birdie, the famed fossil loses avian perch. What they're saying about it now is that they, according to a study of the bones of this thing, they said that the bones grew too slowly for it to be a bird, and so it ain't a bird anymore. It's a reptile. but it's maybe one of these feather reptiles, apparently, according to.
And that's always because this is used by the evolutionary guys to prove missing links between dinosaurs and birds. But even bird specialists will say, look, the bone structure doesn't work, the weight of the bone doesn't work. There's the heart or the lungs. I'm sorry. There's no way to get from a reptile lung to a bird lung that they could possibly see. So even and these are evolutionary guys. Who's the real famous one? What's his name? Fiducia. What's his name?
Fiducia.
Fiducia. Okay, I was right. And he's really been very strong in this. He's pretty well respected in avian circles and evolutionary biology. He says this is going to be the biggest laugh in 100 years that people are going to look at. Still, nevertheless, they're going to rewrite this. They're going to say, well, okay, see, this proves bird died. But the lungs, and like you say, Doug, how do you prove something from 4 fossils that this is like a transitionary thing from one thing to another thing? How do you do that? I mean, it is quite possible that there are creatures that were reptilian that had feathering structures. I mean, we don't see any today, but we don't see dinosaurs today. We don't know enough, but we do know that the internal mechanisms of a bird and a reptile are so completely different. That is an interesting thing there.
It's sort of like, to me, watching a stop-action movie. Okay, we have little photographs here in the fossil record of still photos that we're trying to string together into a movie.
Yes.
But the gaps between these different photos of which would be the fossils,
right.
The record, are presumably millions of years, and so you're supposed to imagine, what it's like between this one and then the one over here, and so we really don't have, in order for it to be a link, we have to see a relative sequence, and what we need to actually also do is to examine the genetics behind it,
which is impossible.
You can't
from a
go
fossil
from fossils, And so here, the study that they're doing with the Archaeopteryx was the study of the bones, and they said, well, it grew too slowly. How do they know that? How did they?
Well, I don't know.
Have samples of when it was before and after, or did they watch it grow? Of course not. You have a still fossil, and all you can do is deduce from this.
Or extrapolate, from the present.
One fossil that the bones grew slowly. Now, how did you know that?
Well, Doug, I tell you, your analogy of the movies is pretty good. I like the moving part of it. To me, it's almost like people who try to put together a puzzle, and if a piece doesn't fit, they kind of cut it to fit. Or maybe you have 3 or 4 different puzzles, and they're trying to make one picture out of all these different pieces, and if it doesn't fit, they kind of rework. Well, this doesn't fit, so let's cut it out to make it fit. Let's force it to fit in here, and then you end up coming out with a picture that doesn't really give you anything of what the truth of the original image was supposed to be. That to me is more like what they're doing here. And every time I turn around, it looks around when you got fossils that are getting debunked by the evolutionary people themselves, the evolutionists themselves.
Right.
It really begs the question of, again, how can we trust anything you say? Or why should we? Mm-hmm. You might say, well, you're self-correcting. I said, well, what you're trying to do is justify and make something sound good and wholesome because you were wrong, okay?
Right.
And I'm going, it's commendable, but what's not commendable is how long and how much of a propaganda machine you're out there promoting these things. And why don't we see the huge play in the press like we do, when it first gets lauded that it is the new missing link or the new thing that proves evolution? We never get that. It's only through shows like this, which are really minor league stuff compared to like National Geographic or Discovery Channel stuff. It's only through shows like this that anybody might even have a chance. And saying that, Doug, they still get it. It's amazing how people get it.
Now, what I also noticed in these articles is how they introduce little sound bites.
All right.
So, that doesn't have anything to do with the article itself, but at the end of the article they have this thing like apes giggle like humans. They have
I saw that, yeah.
And so that's, they sort of saying that this is evidence for evolution. And there was another one that, where was it? That, they keep coming. They just put these one-liners or two-liners of things that they think is evidence for evolution.
Yeah, even though this is wrong, and the main gist of the art is all wrong, still, we're still secure on firm footing.
I remember what it was.
What
it was a study at Michigan State University. It didn't have anything to do with this article, but it was where they were doing watching a mutation in bacteria.
Oh, yeah, I did see that, yes.
And they were watching it as it accumulated this presumably advantageous mutation. Now, then the question is, how do they know that's advantageous?
Yeah.
It's sort of like the nylon-eating bacteria that they found.
Well, and the problem is, Doug, to me, advantageous is a bait and switch argument. The issue is not whether something gives you an advantage, because we've talked about blind fish in dark caves.
Right.
We've talked about short-billed, long-billed finches depending on the environment. No issue that sometimes mutations could cause benefits, but does it result, or does it arrive as a result of an increase in genetic information? See, the real issue is, and this is what's killing evolutionary science, is that when Darwin came around, you had basically material and energy. Matter and energy were the two components, building blocks, to cause evolution. There's a third component that's come up. It's called information. And information screams intelligence. It screams designer. It screams planning. It does not, by any stretch of the imagination, again, that term imagination, you can't even get there without realizing something had to make this happen this way. I mean, Paley had it right back in the day, but he was dealing with macrobiological stuff, or you could tell when something is designed, even in the rocks. Mm-hmm. When you look at a Mount Rushmore compared to some, chief Indian kind of, you could tell when it's been a natural erosion things. No one even has a problem seeing the difference. Okay, one is done by an intelligence. This is the big thing, Doug. Advantageous mutations are not the same thing as saying we've got an increase in genetic information. This is a big difference. See, they've been using this for years, Doug, but in recent years, the last 10, 15 years or so, we know, and longer than that was since the DNA discovery, it's about design, it's about information, it's about computer codes, three-dimensional ones, as you've talked about. This is what it is. Does this advantageous mutation, has new information been imputed to the genome? And that never happens.
And it doesn't explain the foundational computer program that's behind
genetics.
I
didn't even talk about that. You're right. And so so we get to all these macrobiological. It's amazing how they keep going to this chimpanzee giggling or advantageous mutations. And you're saying, well, because the bacteria can do this now. Well, I know it's obvious when we talk about people who with sickle cell anemia who are immune to malaria. I don't consider that very advantageous, but the point of it is, that's a bad. But there are things that give you an advantage in select environments. Mm-hmm. I don't dispute that; it's possible, but you have not increased what's there. You have not changed it fundamentally by adding something that was not there. This is what you need for creation ex nihilo. This is what you need for a non-living thing to become a living cell.
Right.
This is what you need from a living cell to become multi-celled. This is what you need to get to multi-celled to become a fish, an amphibian, a reptile, a bird, a mammal. You have to increase genetic information. That's coding. That's coding that makes things happen. And without that, see, Darwin didn't know about that stuff.
Right.
He can talk about inherited traits, but he's, they just figured, well, matter and energy, it just kind of works together. He had obviously an agenda, he had problems, but forget all that. Darwin at least had some excuses. The modern guy does not have an excuse except he cannot stand to let a theological foot in the door.
Yeah.
Okay?
If you take a look at the fossil record and all these different things that they're taking out of the fossil record to try to have a descent from a common ancestor to from a simple to a complex organism. This whole scenario can very easily be explained by a biblical point of view. Where there is a God who is a designer, and there's nothing in what we've discovered scientifically in the fossil record that can't be explained that way.
See, the thing you brought about a good point. We were talking about the Archaeopteryx. How do you get a bird that's flying around to get buried and perfectly preserved in the fossil record?
Exactly.
I mean, a bird, even the greatest floods, they get warnings. Birds take off. They know when the climate's getting cold or nasty. They get out of there. I mean, or if somehow it happens too fast, Doug, what happens is they get just totally obliterated. If you get some forest fire, they're cooked and basically barbecue. I mean, they're gone.
I was reading
get buried.
one type of Arctic tern of some sort that flies the entire distance from Alaska to New Zealand without stopping.
Wow.
And I can't imagine how it can have so much energy to be able to do something like that. And to be able to, and they've traced this and watched this with several specimens, and I guess they make the flight in just several days, non-stop flight.
Wow. Took a turn for the worse?
Yeah.
No, sorry, I couldn't resist that. Or turn for the better, I guess,
And, we observe things like this, and we say, my goodness, what kind of intelligence to design something like this, or they could actually go these long distances and have enough energy to do it.
Well, yeah, and the thing about it is, to us, Doug, we've talked about this before, but for those who haven't seen the show, it's like oftentimes creationists, people who are biblicists, if you will, are talking about we put a God of the gaps in there. We put a gap because we can't understand it. We put God in there. But I says the evolutionist does even worse. He puts his thing of the gap is time, and there's no evidence for what he's talking about. There's enough time will make things happen. That's time of the gaps, I guess, because you can't allow God in there. So, but at least with God, we understand there's intelligence. If there's something outside of time and space, it makes sense to how we got here. But with what we see in matter and energy, we have no understanding of how information could have ever been created. We have we understand information. We have, Doug, this article we picked up, we can read it. Because somebody knows these symbols have been made up. And then we've been taught to read those symbols. DNA is a similar way. We talked about that. To have that happen, Doug, just doesn't happen.
Right.
Not with just building blocks of material and
now,
energy.
if it was in Russian, it would take a little bit more work for us to try to figure out what it's saying.
Yeah, I wouldn't have the patience for it, but
that's the sort of thing. In order to have information, you have to have something to decode the information.
You have to have a sender as well as a receiver.
Right.
You have to have both things at the same time, or it makes no sense. That's another thing about the DNA. Of course, Doug and I get so fascinated. I saw a video recently. It's amazing. It showed how, geez, Pete, we've talked about this again. To get proteins, you got to have the DNA send out some messenger RNA, and then it comes in and it hooks the amino acids up to make new proteins. So you need proteins to make DNAs, and then you need DNAs to make proteins. And well, how does one happen without? You have to have both at the same time, and there's such a complicated system. I was just fascinated by it, and yet people can look at that, Doug, and not see intelligence behind it. Yet, they'll be the first ones to look at outer space SETI programs and say this because a couple signals in uniform, which they've never been able to find. Right. Oh yeah, one time they did. You know what it was? Turned out to be microwave oven signals from their basement down there. So they thought they found aliens, man. But I'm saying, how do you even come up with the idea you could recognize intelligence if you can't see it in the DNA code? This is what really amazes me, Doug. And so they come back up to these macrobiological things, Archaeopteryx and Lucy and Ardipithecus, and of course the infamous Archaeoraptor, which was a hoax, and the Piltdown Man, of course, a hoax. And the thing is, then they keep going on to the next one. It's like they go to the next one, and then they go to the next one, and then I'm going, wait a minute, what about this last one you proved for 35 years? Lucy was I've seen shows on PBS. I've seen what is it, Cosmos, and what's the one I'm thinking of, Nova, and they're all talking about Lucy. Now she's gone.
Right. Now, let me read this. This is kind of interesting. This is from the Discovery Channel, okay?
All right.
It says, Remember Ida, the fossil discovery announced last May with its own book and TV documentary?
Yes, I do.
A publicity blitz called it the link that would reveal the earliest evolutionary roots of monkeys, apes, and humans. Experts protested that Ida wasn't even a close relative, and now a new analysis supports their reaction. In fact, Ida is as far removed from the monkey-ape-human ancestry as a primate could be, says Eric Seifert of Stony Brook University in New York. He and his colleagues compared 360 specific anatomical features of 117 living and extinct primate species to draw up a family tree. They report the results in Thursday's issue of the journal Nature. So Nature is debunking it. Ida is a skeleton of a 47-million-year-old cat-like sized creature found in Germany. It started in the book The Link, this uncovering their earliest ancestor. And so here they're debunking Ida. So
I mean, on the one hand, Doug, I am thankful that there are honest scientists out there.
Mm-hmm.
I am thankful for that. Thank you for doing that good work and for make yourself credible, admitting when things aren't right. But when are the people going to come up and admit that this has been a history of this kind of stuff? It's been like this since the beginning. One fossil after another has been debunked, and yet you still, Doug, it reminds me of the documentary hypothesis people, the people who, and I believe it's for evolutionary reasons as well, who will try to debunk things in the Bible because, for instance, I'll tell you, the books of Moses weren't written by Moses. Do you know why that theory came up? Because man had not evolved high enough to have writing in the when Moses would have been around. Mm-hmm. Well, after that time, they found the Ebla tablets, they found the Code of Hammurabi, and 100 other things that talked about writing. They predated Moses by 1,000 years. Okay, but guess what? So the very foundation of which they built their theory on has been debunked. Mm-hmm. But they still hold on to the theory. The documentary hypothesis has never been rejected, and I see this in seminaries and in Bible colleges. They're still teaching this nonsense. The fact is, this is the same kind of thing on a secular thing. They get rid of the things that they build their foundation on, yet they still hold on to the basic. It's like they have a house, but no foundation anymore. They've thrown the foundation out over and over again, but they have this big superstructure to let you see that, boy, something really looks good here, doesn't it? We got this big house. It's built on sand. It's built on nothing. And that's really troubling to me. I've seen this over and over again when I see this kind of stuff, Doug.
Yeah,
all right, I'll stop ranting. I'll let him get in a word in edgewise here, But
well, I was sleeping there for a minute.
He wasn't sleeping. He was, But I'm just trying to figure out where we go from here, Doug. I mean, it's like every week I get some people will call me, Doug, will ask me or email me, say, "What about this one?" or "What about this one?" It's like I feel like people are getting jerked and yanked every which way.
It's just like a barrage of little sound bites of misinformation, and it's a shell game, like a sleight of hand. The magician working his magic, and by the way, this one's debunked, but over here we got something else that comes up.
This one really proves it.
This one really proves it, but then they disprove that. It wasn't this one; it's now this one over here, and it's sort of like the radioisotope dating things. Potassium argon was the thing for a long time.
Still used.
Then it's rubidium strontium, and the rubidium strontium is the be all end all for radioisotope dating and proving millions of years. And they debunked that, and it's now neodymium samarium and argon, all these different isotope datings, and they're foundationally wrong.
To begin with, yes.
And so this is the issue, is that we have all these different things that come out, and this is like Ian Juby says, you start out with an evolutionary assumption, you find a fossil and fit it within your evolutionary assumptions. By the way, this proves evolution. And so then you go back to the beginning, and because now you have an evolutionary assumption, you can go and do this same method to the next fossil.
Well, we've often talked about the tautologies that they use, the circular reasoning that they use to prove this. When the fossil proves the age of the rocks prove the age of the fossil. Well, wait a minute, what the heck? How does this work? It's like, I remember years ago, Doug, when you and I went down to some place, and I never realized, I never thought about it, maybe people out there haven't either, that the rocks that are dated Precambrian oftentimes aren't a whole lot different than those that might be dated Cretaceous. Now, they might be, well, Precambrian would be because that's kind of the base of rocks, but let's say an Ordovician strata or a Devonian or a Cretaceous. Oftentimes they're made up of the same kinds of rocks, but it's the fossils that are in them.
Right.
And I always thought we would have to have different rocks that were the earlier rocks, and because Precambrian is kind of the basalts and the granites kind of thing generally, but anything else that's sedimentary, they could be all the same kinds of rocks or different. It just depends what's in them. Whether you got a triceratops, or whether you got a worm, or whether you got a bird. It depends on how they age the rocks. But the rocks are no different. It's based on their assumptions, Doug, that this one's older than this one, that they make it an older thing. Of course, whether it's on top or bottom. Of course, if things are on top and flipped around, well, then they had their explanations for that too.
All the general burial sequence, like for example, if you find a bird buried in the rocks, you would generally classify that as recent because, according to evolutionary theory, the birds didn't come until way, way, way late. However, if you find a bird buried in fossils, what it really means is that would have been buried last up on the top layers because...
Which makes total sense. They would have been in the air anyway.
Yeah, would have been in the air. So it's a different reason for...
Again, back to Archaeopteryx. How did we get those things preserved in a fossil? There was no place for that guy. You cannot run, you cannot hide, Archaeopteryx. You're underground. You're going to get it. You're going to get buried.
I've often wondered, if you had a fossilized lilac-breasted roller or something like that. You remember that?
Yeah,
I do. How would you know that that's exactly what it is? Based upon.
I know. I've always been amazed at some of that stuff that they're able to find, but still, I'm glad again that they did come clean on this. But the point remains: when are they going to admit that it's all really a bunch of malarkey and it's built upon a foundation of sand?
So don't believe this house of cards. We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.